This new moon is a big one, but it's not in all the ways that you expect. Yes, there is a new moon Mercury CAZIMI in Taurus, but also, over the preceding 10 hours, the moon will ingress into Gemini and oppose Lilith. Which is what I mean when I say that this new moon is here to slap us in the face with clarity and truth, whether we are ready or not. So, if you're seeing this, maybe it's your sign to get ready for that, and we sip. So, this video is split up into 3 parts. The first part will be the astrology of this new moon. The second part will be the history of the transits of this new moon. I researched the history of both a new moon Mercury CAZIMI in Taurus at or around 25 degrees. And I also researched moments in history where there was a new moon Mercury CAZIMI in Taurus in general that was preceded by a Gemini moon opposing a Sagittarius Lilith within 4 days of that new moon, so still within the new moon cycle. The last part of this video will be expectations and predictions for this moon cycle, which yes, is based around this new moon, but will play out over the next month as we reach the full moon and close out this complete moon cycle. So, grab a drink, grab a snack, grab a smoke. Let's dive in. Now, before we dive into the astrology of the new moon itself, I want to go over the astrology of a couple days before so that we can look at the creation of the seed which is being planted with this new moon. I'm actually going to go back all the way to the 11th on Monday because there's 2 really prominent aspect patterns that hit that day, all of which revolving around the conditions of that Mercury CAZIMI and the moon. So, at the time, the moon was in Pisces, and she trined Jupiter in Cancer. Now, Jupiter rules Pisces Hellenistically, traditionally, and the moon, of course, rules Cancer, so they're in this beneficial flowing aspect between each other and also in mutual reception. Additionally, both the moon and Jupiter were sextiling the Mercury CAZIMI, because while the Mercury CAZIMI peaked on the 14th, we've been feeling it since May 3rd, and we'll stop feeling it by the end of this weekend. Anyways, this trine sextile creates a minor triangle. Now, I've talked about minor triangles on this channel before, but if you are new here, the best way to describe minor triangles is to compare them to grand trines. Grand trines are formed when there are 3 planets all trining each other. The difference between a trine and a sextile as an aspect is that trines are very, very harmonious and flowing. So much so that they don't have like any tension whatsoever, which is why grand trines, while are amazing, amazing aspect patterns, they can have a hard time manifesting into the 3D, into reality, because there is so much harmony and flow going on, versus a sextile has the tiniest bit more tension. And that tiny, tiny bit of tension is why a minor triangle is much more likely to manifest in the 3D in reality. The point in which both of the trining planets are sextiling, in this case, is the Mercury CAZIMI. In a minor triangle, the apex is the goal, and the trining planets are the opportunities, the pathways to achieve this goal. Which means that in this case, the moon in Pisces being compassionate, intuitive, artistic, creative, immersive, and Jupiter exalted in Cancer, because Cancer provides the nurturing, emotional, empathetic love for the growth which Jupiter is always striving towards. Both of these energies are the opportunities, the pathways to achieve the Mercury CAZIMI's goal of sudden clarity, honest conversations, breakthroughs, and understanding. However, the conditions of the moon that day tell us that the opportunities, the pathways towards these breakthroughs are not all easy, or not all sunshine and rainbows, because the moon that day is also the apex of a T-square, which I've also talked about on this channel, but again, if you're new here, T-squares are formed when there are 2 planets opposing each other, both squaring a 3rd planet. While the minor triangle gives us different opportunities, pathways to that goal, the apex of a T-square is like the boiling point of a pot that is put on the stove, and you just walk away and it just keeps boiling. Like, there's no choice in how that flows over or where that goes. And in this T-square, we had Lilith in Sagittarius opposing Venus in Gemini. Lilith represents the exiled, suppressed, and untamed parts of our psyche, our ultimate shadow side, and all that encompasses. In the truth-seeking, exploratory, philosophically mutable fire sign of Sagittarius, Lilith brings forth questioning of beliefs, rebellion against dogma, raw honesty, extreme impatience, and self-righteousness, which is why the tension of Lilith's opposition to the surface level, detached, fickle shadow sides of Venus in Gemini is so obvious. The immensely heated release valve of this tension is that moon in Pisces. Again, that compassionate, vast oceanic immersion that I talked about. Which reminds me of what I say when I close out every video, that the only way out is through. That boiling point between I don't want to dive into it and the other side going, no bitch, let's talk about it. Because you can't avoid the conversation at a certain point. We are all immersed in the exploitative systems that drive our daily routines every day. We can't avoid the conversation at a certain point. The only way out is through. The only way out is navigating and exploring the waters of where you are so you don't drown. All of this astrology coming together with the moon in both aspect patterns is showing us that with every problem, with every hardship, there is wisdom that is grown. The Japanese, I hope I'm correct, where they take the broken dish and they glue it back together with this beautiful gold filling. Mental breakthroughs that come from that raw honesty are not easy, they are not comfortable, but they can be immense, huge opportunities for life-changing growth. This energy was reactivated on Thursday the 14th, as the moon at that point in Aries squared Jupiter, still in Cancer. So we have this tension between the moons, our subconscious, our emotions, our somatic body, our internal desire to act upon the truth that is being clarified and shown to us with the Mercury CAZIMI, and the emotional security, the home security of Jupiter in Cancer, which is only lit up further by the moon joining the Mars-Chiron conjunction the same day, highlighting again those individualistic survival wounds of the exploitative nature of our daily routines, like I was mentioning. The trine between the moon and Venus and Gemini that day offers some healing guidance, though, showing us to lean into the adaptability, ingenuity, and openness of the light sides of Gemini. Which brings us to the Mercury CAZIMI, which not just peaked that day, but was amplified even further by Ceres, the asteroid of nurturing, joining in and merging with that CAZIMI, which really amplified the Taurus energies of stability and fertility, bringing us some much needed groundedness with the major breakthroughs that have been happening this week. By the end of the day Thursday, the moon ingressed into Taurus, and by Friday, May 15th, the moon squared Pluto in Aquarius, activating that 6-year-long outer planet minor triangle that I've mentioned multiple times with you guys. But if you're new here and you'd like to learn more about that, you can check out my Uranus in Gemini video. Anywho, with the moon squaring Pluto, it activated Pluto, being one of the wings of that minor triangle, bringing us more opportunities or steps of the long out of capitalism through a harsh look backward and a forced step forward. The moon's sextile to the North Node in Pisces further amplified the necessity of the discomfort as part of our growth. And on the note of evolution, this sets the scene for this new moon. The day starts off with a sextile between the new moon and Jupiter, with now both planets in their exalted signs, providing us the love and nurturing that we need to really surrender into this new beginning. And as the new moon comes to its peak, she of course joins the Mercury CAZIMI. For a quick refresher, the sun represents our core vitality, our identity, and our ego consciousness, both personally and collectively. Mercury acts as the great communicator, the processor of information, and the architect of all forms of technology and, again, communication. This CAZIMI is happening in the dark, fertile soil of Taurus, where profound intention setting and deep introspection can truly deeply take root. Taurus, a Venusian-ruled earth sign represented by the bull, represents sensuality, determination, and materialistic matters, such money, and thus the societal systems which are ran by money. Furthermore, this new moon is at 25 degrees, which is an Aries degree, Aries being the beginning of the zodiac. Aries is ruled by Mars and is a cardinal fire sign that brings the energy of the pioneer, the warrior, bold initiator, courageous, confident, compassionate, impulsive. So when you inject that fiery, courageous passion into the stubborn, foundational earth of Taurus, you get extremely nutrient-rich soil fertilized from the ashes of what has been burned, which some would say is the most fertile ground for growing seeds. There's a reason that controlled burnings have been practiced by multiple cultures all around the world for ages. Over the next day, the moon ingresses into Gemini and opposes Lilith in Sagittarius. So by the time this new moon hits, we have this fully created seed of truth, a breakthrough in clarity and understanding that is ready to be planted. And over the next day, the moon ingresses into Gemini and opposes Lilith, with the purposes of really making us plant that seed, whether we are ready or not. At the same time, there is a square between that Gemini moon and the North Node in Pisces. Returning back to the energies of Pisces and Sagittarius, recall how both are ruled by Jupiter. Pisces is watery, immersive expansion. Sagittarius is fiery, outward expansion. The North Node in Pisces is all about embracing faith, spiritual surrender, and releasing control. Lilith in Sagittarius, again, raises questions about dogma, beliefs, and falsehood. Also recall the surface level detachment that I mentioned as one of the shadows of Gemini. Keeping all of that in mind, the tension of the moon's square to the North Node and opposition to Lilith, these surface both boil down to a battle between that surface level detachment and the raw, messy, yet heartwarming nature of authentic connection. This energy carries out through most of the next day. As the moon makes her way through Gemini, she sextiles the Mars-Chiron conjunction, offering some healing to all of the triggers that have brought the breakthroughs of this week. However, she squares Neptune, Neptune being the other ruler of Pisces, currently in Aries, once again highlighting the tension between boundless visionary pioneering and surface level detachment, which is once again lit up even brighter by a trine with the North Node. Once again, that harsh look backward and really inevitable and or forced foot forward. And as we reach the end of the day on the 18th, the moon conjoins Venus at the end of Gemini, and both ingress into Cancer over the course of that evening. This signals an end to that battle between surface level detachment and raw, authentic connection. Venus in Gemini emphasizes mental connection, curiosity, variety, adaptability, flexibility. By contrast, Venus in Cancer shifts the focus entirely to emotional security, intimacy, and nurturing. While Gemini wants to talk, explore, understand, Cancer wants to be held, to feel safe. There is a deep alignment with this shift, deep alignment between the mental desires and playfulness that we have grown throughout Venus in Gemini, and our emotional desires and needs, our somatic needs, somatic intimacy. We end this moon cycle with a beautiful minor triangle, with the apex being that conjunction between the moon and Venus, and the wings being the Mars-Chiron conjunction, as well as the South Node in Virgo, pointing towards an alchemization of the breakthroughs and realizations we've had about our daily routines and all of the forms all of that takes, into the birthing of a more intimate, authentic, nurturing way of being, way of connecting, way of operating in our daily lives. The alchemizing rebirth of this new moon is only made clearer by the history behind these transits. Of research. My neurodivergent ass went completely down the rabbit hole and did quite a bit of research on this new moon. Like I said earlier in the video, I researched 2 major transits, 2, let's call them cosmic signatures for the sake of ease. So, cosmic signature A is a Mercury new moon CAZIMI at or around 25 degrees of Taurus. Cosmic signature B is a Mercury new moon CAZIMI anywhere in Taurus that was followed up by a moon in Gemini opposing Lilith in Sagittarius within 4 days of that new moon. I've also divided up all of the historical examples into 4 different themes. So as we go through all of this history, I will have up on the screen if we are talking about cosmic signature A or B, and also which theme we are in. The first theme is ideological control, mostly Christian nationalism, but also free speech in general. After Rome's first emperor Augustus died, his grumpy, paranoid adoptive son Tiberius took over. Tiberius, being the paranoid guy he was, didn't trust anybody, so he utilized treason laws. A new class of citizens emerged. They were called the informants. If they overheard you making a joke about the government or the emperor to the state, they would report you to the state, and if you were found guilty, you lost all of your wealth. The informant gets a cut, and the state gets the rest. one of the first of many examples of state security being equated to ideological control and furthermore control of the masses, of the mind. And this striving for ideological control obviously comes with the pressure for uniformity to the point of complete enforcement. For centuries, Rome was a pagan empire. But by the late 300s, Emperor Theodosius I decided that the only way to keep a crumbling empire unified was to enforce a single identity. He thus made Christianity the official state religion and banned all pagan practices. Theodosius issued his famous decrees legalizing all of this between 391 and 392. Passing a law is one thing. Enforcing it upon an entire empire is an entire other challenge. That takes years, especially given the time period. So 394 was the violent physical enforcement of these anti-pagan decrees, a boiling point that would hit its head in September of that year, in a 3-day civil war called the Battle of Frigidus. This was a civil war between Theodosius I in the east and Eugenius as well as Arbogast in the west, due to the death of the Western Emperor Valentinian II, who died under suspicious circumstances. Arbogast was of barbarian descent, so he couldn't take the throne. So instead he set up a puppet emperor, Eugenius. Theodosius, of course, was not recognizing this, and on top of that, did not like how they were trying to bring back paganism, which led to this civil war, the Battle of Frigidus, and Theodosius, of course, won. So, bye-bye to paganism. Fast forward to May 815, the Eastern Roman Empire, led by Emperor Leo V, was crumbling, was losing wars and land. And instead of, looking at reality in front of him, Leo decided that all of these losses were punishments from God because they weren't being Christian enough. This kicked off a brutal second iconoclasm. The government embarked on a massive campaign to smash, burn, and ruin church art. Any person who kept or held any kind of icon were viewed as a traitor to the state, becoming one of many dictations on what pure, true Christianity is. Speaking of Christian nationalism, in the 1500s, the Netherlands were ruled by the Christian Spanish Empire. When the Dutch began converting to Protestantism, the Spanish did not like that. So the king passed laws making Protestantism a crime punishable by death. A group of Dutch nobles walked into the Spanish court to petition for peace, and the Spanish mocked them, calling them beggars. This led to the Dutch adopting the insult, owning the term beggars. They proudly wore beggar pouches and medals. As the Dutch and commoners began to protest and organize, Spain of course sent in the military and executed thousands of Protestants, as well as confiscated land. This obviously only infuriated the Dutch even more and pushed them even further into organizing, into rebellion, which led to the 80 Years' War and the fight for Dutch independence, which brings us to May 1950, during the height of the Red Scare. Where we once again saw systematic enforcement of ideological purity, according to colonial Christian nationalist capitalism. And here we are with free speech being eliminated further and further. The second theme is naval hegemony, maritime resistance, and trade routes. In 475 BCE, we saw the Mutual Defense Pact of the Delian League expand into a centralized strategic alliance. Initially with the Delian League, every city contributed ships. But after a little while, Athens told the smaller cities that if they provided the cash, Athens could provide the protection. Athens then used that cash to fund a golden age and build up its own empire. This consolidation of city-states definitely bringing up colonialism. Remember the Christian nationalism we were just talking about? Of course, it had to come back again in this theme. However, this Crusades example is here in the naval theme for a reason. By May 1203, the Crusaders were completely broke, and so they could not pay the Venetians for their ships. An exiled prince of Constantinople offered them a deal. He said, "Help me take the throne of the Byzantine Empire, and I will pay off all of your debts." The Crusaders, of course, took him up on this deal. They sailed to Constantinople, a fellow Christian city, and sacked it. Of course, showing their true colors. The last naval example we have is in 1398. The Victual Brothers, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, were a massive organized guild of pirates who ruled the Baltic Sea. They started out as legitimate mercenaries, bringing food and such to besieged cities, but they liked the power so much that they just went full-on pirates. The island of Gotland was their sanctuary, and thus they shut down international shipping and completely broke the trade of the Hanseatic League. To save on their profits, an order of warrior monks called the Teutonic Knights launched a massive naval assault, violently kicking the pirates off of their sanctuary in order to make the seas safe for corporate commerce once more. After their invasion, a successful armistice was signed on April 5th. The subsequent weeks saw the knights hunting down the remaining pirates and fortifying the city, which brings us to our third theme, warfare. Our first historical example in this theme brings us to 350 BCE. Before King Philip II of Macedon, armies fought in loose, chaotic lines. Phil revolutionized warfare by creating the Macedonian phalanx, bringing another layer of strategic power to warfare. Our next example is in 690. Empress Wu Zetian was the first and only woman to rule China in her own right. Because the traditional male aristocracy wanted to overthrow her, she advanced political technology and communications by inventing an anonymous tip line. She specifically created a specialized bronze box and placed it in the capital. It had 4 slots, allowing citizens to drop anonymous tips about rebel plots, military strategies, or corrupt officials. It allowed her to bypass the elites and build a massive crowdsourced surveillance intelligence network. The sweeping structural reforms that followed occurred throughout the entire year of 690. Empress Wu was officially inaugurated in October of that year. In our last historical example in Theme 3 is the Battle of Lodi, when a young Napoleon Bonaparte charged to the front lines, led the French troops through gunfire towards the Austrian army with such a ferocious charge that the Austrians fled. This brings us to Theme 4, the last theme of all of these historical examples, institutional collapse. In 103 BCE, we had the Roman land crisis. Traditionally, only wealthy Romans who owned land could join the army. But when Rome ran out of soldiers, General Marius, of course, changed the rules so that poor people could join the army, promising them that in return for their hard-earned efforts, the government would give them a plot of land. Of course, when they got home, the wealthy didn't want to actually give them the land, which of course led to the bypassing of the Senate to force land allocation bills, which of course led to the shattering of the Roman Republic and the rise of autocracy, and aka the Roman Empire. Fast forward to 193 CE, after a brief civil war, the Praetorian Guard put the throne of the Roman Empire itself up for sale. A man named Didius Julianus won by promising every soldier a lifetime's fortune. By May, Didius Julianus was trapped completely bankrupt, marking the end of his purchased authority. By 460, the Western Roman Empire was a complete hollow shell. Invading Germanic tribes had taken over Spain and France, leaving Rome broke. Emperor Majorian spent his entire reign frantically trying to keep Rome together. In May of that year, his massive fleet of 300 ships at Portus Ilictanus took a devastating blow from the Vandals, completely destroying the entire fleet and ruining Western Rome's last chance of survival. By 565 CE, Eastern Rome was also not in a good position. Emperor Justinian spent his entire life trying to conquer the old Roman Empire and build architectural wonders, but nature had other plans. In the middle of his reign, a catastrophic bubonic plague hit and wiped out a third of the population. By May, his legendary general Belisarius had died. The last final months of Julian's reign were defined by a crippling economic crisis. In 885, we saw more structural collapsing of empires. Charlemagne had built a massive unifying empire over really all of Western Europe. But his descendants couldn't get along, so they split the empire up so that they all could have their own chunk. While the elites were playing politics and fighting over what's whose, they completely neglected national defense, which created a vacuum for the Vikings to lay siege on major cities. In May of 85, Charles the Fat assumed control of the Western Frankish kingdom, briefly reunifying Charlemagne's empire on paper. In reality, of course, the state was fracturing quite rapidly. Just a few months later, a colossal Vikings fleet would sail up the Seine to lay the historic siege of Paris. This brings us to our next historical example in 1053. Before the Normans conquered England in 1066, the country was ruled by Anglo-Saxon kings, but the real power sat with Earl Godwin, a massively wealthy warlord who owned nearly a third of the country's land. When he died, all of that land was frantically broken up. This massive reshuffling of power and property destabilized the very fragile English court, once again creating an opportunity for invasion, this time by the Normans, over the next 10 years. Our very, very last historical example is in 1628. King Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that he was chosen by God and was above the law. He wanted to fund expensive foreign wars, but Parliament wouldn't give him the money. In response, the king forced citizens to give him loans and would throw anybody who refused into prison. Increasingly desperate for cash, he once again reached out to the parliament. They refused to give him a single penny until he signed the Petition of Right, a law that stated that the king could not levy taxes without permission, and furthermore could not jail citizens arbitrarily, becoming one of the first of many steps to take down that divine right of kings, which over time has become the divine right of capital. Now, let's get into the expectations and predictions for this new moon, and now let's get into the expectations and predictions for this moon cycle. The Christian nationalism that we went into is reminding me absolutely of what's going on in the global west right now. We are seeing a rise in extreme right-wing conservatism. Free speech is being attacked more and more, particularly speech against Israel, against the genocide of Palestine, speech against Trump and the Trump administration. I'm sure we'll see not just more updates on, but the following through on the labels on the White House's new counterterrorism strategy that they released to target what they call left-wing radicals, and the Red-Green Alliance, which is a term that the government is using to describe the convergence between radical progressive leftism and Middle Eastern movements. ABC recently sued the FCC. I'm sure we're going to see a result on that or an update on that. Abortion rights are being attacked, so female autonomy is going to be further attacked. Furthermore, voting rights are being attacked. We are seeing Jim Crow era gerrymandering. I think this moon cycle is going to show us how deeply true it is that we are not free until we are all free. That the rights that we have been guaranteed were always temporary because they have always been dependent upon the classification of what a good American, a good citizen is systematically. Furthermore, I thought it was really interesting that this new moon had a bunch of history in not just warfare and conflict, but maritime conflict. So we're definitely going to see, over the course of this moon cycle, the Strait of Hormuz crisis heightened, amplified, intensified. Which leads me to say that this moon cycle will likely be about becoming hotter and hotter faster than we expect. I think that the lines have to be drawn in the sand, especially taking into consideration the way that this is impacting energy resources, supply chain resources, stability, countries, entities, their move to resecure their movement in the area. And we know that that's going to mean the sides of this world war becoming clearer. Because the thing is, the US and Israel are not going to change their stance, and Iran isn't going to change theirs either. And thus, whatever international diplomacy that we have being completely shaken up and will continue to reshuffle itself to points of no return. I think the energy of tactile, strategic, determined intellectual movements and actions are going to push countries to make their choice about the strategies that they need to implement in this crisis, the actions that they need to take. All of this, of course, are the results of late-stage capitalism. All different forms of authoritarian control. All different forms of authoritarian control. Control of the mind, control of the body, colonial control, imperial control of mind, of the body, of conversations, of the way we relate to each other, and of resources. Just like I said, we are in a cold world war, we are in a cold civil war here in the US. And just like I said, that cold world war is going to become increasingly hotter to a point of no return with this moon cycle. I think that the cold US civil war will reach a similar heated point of no return as well. I don't think this will translate as the secession of a state. I do think that will mean an attack on state rights of Democrat-ruled states. The big ones coming to mind are California and New York, and also Virginia. I think we're going to see the attack on trans rights get worse. I'm thinking about the Tennessee State Database of Trans Patients thing that just passed. I think that it's very clearly a part of Project 2025, and the more that Project 2025 things pass, the more they're going to try to pull them on the rest of us. Attack on progressivism, leftivism. I think we're going to see the attack on progressivism and leftism hit a place that most average people would say they don't expect, but minorities absolutely do expect. I think is going to hit a point where we literally can't avoid the conversation, which is what this entire new moon is all about. I think that's the shit that's going to happen, not just with this new moon, but the entire moon cycle itself, is things happening in our external reality with all the crises that are going on that make us hit a point where we cannot avoid the conversation. I think the energy crisis and supply chain crisis is going to start hitting us hard. The harsh look backward and the foot forward thing I mentioned a couple times. I think that we're going to have to take that harsh look at the unsustainability of our current systems and ways of life, and thus be forced to start planting the seeds for a more sustainable way of living through the brutal reality of the polycrisis we're all struggling through. And I think that's a good segue to translate into how this will hit us personally. Because I think even personally, that harsh look backward and forced foot forward is what this moon cycle is all about. Our own unsustainable, harmful patterns, behaviors, relationships, environments, being burned by that 25 Aries degree, CAZIMI, to be alchemized by the sun, Mercury, and the new moon into a more sustainable version, whatever harmful, toxic pattern, behavior, relationship, environment, etc. was burned. And whatever area of life that is will have to do with whatever house in your birth chart is ruled by Taurus, where your Venus is, where your moon is, where your Mercury is, where your sun is, and the conditions of all of those planets. Things like what sign they're in, what house they're in, what degree they're at, their aspects, the planet is dignified or debilitated, conditions of the planet which rules the sign which that planet is in. All of which can feel a bit overwhelming if you're new to astrology. The link is in my bio. Given the state of things, I of course accept an equal exchange of goods and or services, but don't. So if you'd like to book with me that way, please DM me. If you're still watching, you and I both know that the algorithm does not like videos like this. So yes, I am going to ask you, please share the video, please comment, please like it, please interact with it, all the things. And if you want to keep up with me, then go ahead and subscribe not just to this channel, but also to my blog. This video, in fact, was based on my latest weekly astro guide. I did expand on it with the history a bit this time, but I do always post on my blog first. Furthermore, this astro guide includes some shadow work prompts, mantras, and a somatic practice for this new moon. As always, the only way out is through. Sending you so much love and lunar blessings.